Okay, welcome to the second episode of Loop Houston. I'm here with Lennart Koopman and Rakesh. Lennart is the founder of Greylog, a open source logging software.
Yeah, I'll explain that later.
That he will explain shortly. Lennart is from Germany. He recently moved to Houston about a year ago. And so he's with us here today. Thanks for coming, Lennart. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So just to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? How'd you get started, your early interest in computers, and how that brought you to where you are today, founding Greylog?
Right. I was born in Germany. I was living in Germany for 27 and a half years almost. I started working with computers really early, I think. So my brother is 4 years older than I am, and he started playing around with computers when he was probably 11 or 12 or something. And so he showed me the first very, very literally basic things. Like I was programming BASIC. I wouldn't really call it programming. Now that I know what programming is, I wouldn't call it programming what I did back then, but it was a DOS computer. I think it has Windows 3.11 on it too. And I was playing around the command line, and I was lucky enough to still start with a computer that was running on a command line. So I grew up with a command line, probably so I was born in 88, and I guess people born in 90 probably already missed the command line days and were used to only Windows 95 or something. I was just playing around with computers forever, and was of course playing games on it, but I was also programming small interfaces so I could select the game that I wanted to play more easy and didn't have to type in these DOS commands to navigate to a floppy disk and stuff like that. And I just kept on doing that. Then right out of school, I decided to basically start working right away. So I skipped college. I never went to college. I left the German equivalent of high school and decided to go to the next bigger city because I grew up pretty much on the countryside on a small 10,000 people living there town, maybe. Not much going on. One computer company that was building not very interesting websites for the local companies in that small town. So I thought I can either work for that company or I can go to college, or I can just go to the next bigger city, which was Hamburg, and go there and start working right away. And that's basically what I did. So I came out of school and started working professionally. I was lucky enough to find a company that was...
By the way, that town, I kind of remember you're telling me about this once, but, it was the goal of a lot of people who grew up there to get out of that town.
Yes.
I mean, not necessarily that particular town, but just it was a small town.
Yeah, it was the classic European or German small town where if you wanted to do something, especially with computers or something with technology, then it was clear you wouldn't do it there. If you wanted to have a career, basically, it was clear you would leave that town sooner or later. Either just to go to college, and some people came back and started businesses there, or joined the local insurance branch of a bigger insurance company over there. But many people I know left and didn't come back, only come back for Christmas or to see their parents over the year, basically.
Does your family still live there?
Yes, my parents still live there. My brother is studying, so he's in college right now. He left. I don't know if he's going to come back. We'll see.
So you moved to Hamburg, back to...
Yes. Yeah. So I moved from there to Hamburg. How old was I? I think I just turned 16, actually, when I decided to move to Hamburg. And
wow.
I would say I was lucky because my generation was also the last generation, born in 88, was the last year that still had to do the civil service in Germany. So you could decide if you wanted to do civil service or go to the army for 9 months. I think everyone born in 89 didn't have to do this anymore. So it was really just 88 was the last year that still had to do it. There was no way around it. And most people I know decided to just write a letter to the army, basically, and then you could say, hey, I don't want to do this, but I can do 9 months working in a hospital, for example, as basically a replacement of your military service. They got rid of it because there's no Cold War anymore, and they were like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. The cool thing is, however, that they take care of you for 9 months, because the law says that someone who does civil service has to have exactly the same rights and the same or get the same things as someone who does the military service. And because military service, you would be in barracks, basically, and you would have a place to stay. As a civil service, or when you're doing civil service, you will be getting a place to live, and they will pay all your bills and take care of you. So you're basically living on the premises of the hospital, and you don't have to care about anything, which is great for your first 9 months of moving out.
So you did this.
I did
when
that.
You moved to Hamburg.
I did that, and I sent them my CV. And usually they put you help somewhere in the hospital, or you clean up outside, you do something social, something to help others. They saw my resume, however, and they saw that I was interested in computers. And just in the month when I wanted to start, they had another person doing civil service just end his civil service the month before in their IT department. So I was basically working in their IT department for 9 months to help monitor the system, set up computers, do stuff like that, which is they pay you pretty well, actually. They take care of everything, and you get your first professional experience and your first months away from home, basically.
Is it uncommon for a 16-year-old to leave home and in Germany?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
So
it is? Okay.
I had to do a lot of paperwork to be screened for military service before they call you. Usually you would get a letter when you turn 18 or 19 or 20. You get a letter saying, like, on this date, you got to come here and we'll screen you to see if you are able to do military service. And then they'll just put you into a unit if you don't say you want to do the civil service. And I had to ask to get this done so I could start my civil service. Like, this is not even, the system doesn't really expect someone to do this under 20 years old, basically.
So did you finish high school early then?
So I never skipped a class, and I never had to repeat a class. So I just skipped I just finished a normal year. So you just finish with 16.
At 16?
Yeah, at 16 or 17, you usually finish high school in Germany, yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's great. Yeah, in the American context, I think that 16 years old is pretty young for a young adult to leave the nest and
right.
Go out and find their way.
Yeah, and it's also unusual for Germany, definitely. It was a good decision, and I always had a good and still have a good relationship to my parents, and they supported that, and so it was just getting out of the small town was really the reason.
That's great. And so you did that for 9 months?
Yes.
And sorry, that was a hospital?
That was at a hospital,
At a
right?
hospital. Got it.
Exactly. And then I did I don't know if that's a word that people in the US would know, but in Germany it's called an apprenticeship. And Germany has this half school, half practical work apprenticeship system, which I think is great because you get the theoretical knowledge that you need to get started, and you also get the practical knowledge, how to actually work, basically, right? Like, you work with clients. You spend 4 days of the week you spend at a company working with them, and you have a trainer there, and then 1 or 2 days a week you go to school, basically. And it's a good combination, I think. It's not really teaching you computer science, so if you want to do more with this, you better take care that you learn this stuff yourself. Because I've seen people coming out of this and they were still not prepared to really work professionally. They would do, they wouldn't be able to start right away as a developer, for example. They would have to do support for some time or something that's easier to get started with, probably.
What skill sets do you think they were missing?
I think they were. What you learn in school is really only the surface. It is they will tell you how to write a basic PHP program, but then how to really operate a database and how to write something that's scaling. This is something you're supposed to learn in the company that you're working with. But if that company is not really doing that, but only working on small client projects, then you will still not learn it. So I spent just all my free time learning stuff that I wouldn't have learned if I just did this normal apprenticeship, I think.
So you did an apprenticeship?
Yes.
After the civil service. After the civil service. And that's assigned to you by the government? The apprenticeship is assigned?
No. You have to, it's basically like getting any other job. You have to apply, you have to find an open position, and then the government is assigning you a spot at school somewhere. That's like your place in a class. That's what you get. But the job itself you have to find.
Right. And you choose a field that... there's a corresponding academic program that corresponds to that apprenticeship.
Exactly. So I had to collect this information in English for my visa over here in the US. I think it's called a computer science expert apprenticeship. That's, I think, the official name. That's also recognized in the US.
Yeah, I've actually heard the German apprenticeship system referenced as something that we could do with more of here in the United States. In the context of a conversation about our education system, higher education system, and how there's a bit of a bubble in higher education. There are a lot of people that are getting 4-year degrees and getting into significant debt, getting a 4-year degree that really should be doing something that's more vocational.
Yeah.
And this apprenticeship program that Germany has is that, right? It prepares you to do work in the real world.
Exactly.
Right? And it's a mix of practice and theory.
Exactly.
I didn't realize it was 4 days of practice and 1 day of theory.
Yeah, that's what it usually is. And then sometimes you have half a year where it's 2 days of theory, but it depends. And the tests that you have to do after, so I did that for 3 years. That's the normal. It usually takes 3 years. You could do it shorter if you had a higher education before, then it's 2 years, but I did it for 3 years. And the tests that you have to do at the end are all standardized so that the people are actually, or if I remember I had, I think, a 1.8 or something, and the 1.0 would be the best, and I had a 1.8, and then you can compare my grade to basically anyone else in Germany, no matter in which state of Germany that person did that test, basically. So you get your certification at the end. I never showed it to anyone since then. Like, no one really cared. I think, which is just if you work in IT, no one really cares about, like, what is your computer science expert degree. I had to find a copy for my visa documents here, and it was hard to find it. And especially in IT, it's like, show me what you can do, and not so much of what did you graduate in, or what was your what grade did you get? Yeah,
interesting. And how long did the apprenticeship last?
That was 3 years.
3 years.
It's usually between 2 and 3 years.
And what company did you end up at?
It was a small company. It was we were always between 6 and 10 people probably working there, with one more senior guy who was taking care of basically training me. It was basically web development, all kinds of web development. One cool thing that I did there, actually, and I'm glad that I did that, was that the Hamburg harbor is, I think, the second biggest in Europe, and they have a lot of ships going in and out, of course, and they need a coordination of for the companies that operate the tugs, for example, and for the companies that are attaching the ships when they're coming. Like, they still throw long ropes over the ship and they just pull it on, right? They have to coordinate that somehow and know when a ship is coming in and get an automated alert that this is a ship of a client and we have to do some service on that ship when it comes in. And that is the information from these ships are broadcasted on a public frequency. And my graduation project actually was a software that was connected to an antenna or to multiple antennas along the shoreline of Germany, basically, that was listening for those radio communications and was plotting onto a Google map the position of these ships and when they would be coming in and stuff like that. So that was where I learned a lot about low-level C programming and operating databases and stuff like that. Because my trainer basically said, you seem to know what you're doing. Just, this is the device, this is the cable where the signals are coming out. Write some program that can plot this on a map, basically. And that was a pretty cool project to end the apprenticeship with. Because usually you would build a WordPress site with a MySQL database behind it or something. So I was glad that I was able to do that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So that's the kind of project that this company did?
That was one of the biggest projects of this company. The others were content management systems and just the grunt work of internet programming, I guess.
And so I'm interested in this software. So what would it do? It would say, hey, this vessel has come in based on the radio signal that was received by
these antennas that we had, and we translated the analog signal that came in through the antenna, send it over the network, and then my program would accept that data and would parse it back into the information, because it's basically short packets that say, I am a vessel that's doing this or this operation, this is my heading, this is my GPS position, stuff like that. So you could just store that in a database and plot that on a map in the end. That was pretty interesting because it had real life thing. Like, I think we had a conversation once about if I was to start any company right now, I would probably do something with drones because it's something that you can touch.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it makes sense or not, but I would like to do something with drones because you can touch it.
Was the receiver radio and the computer that uplinked this data to this database, was it battery powered, or did you have some sort of like station there? And what was the range of the radio?
It was basically if there was a ship somewhere on the German coastal line, then you could accept that signal almost all over northern Germany. So you just had to have like several antennas along the shoreline, and we actually paid people who lived close to the sea, to the North Sea, for example, in that case, and said, "Can you put this thing on your house, on your roof, and we'll give you 50 euros a month or something." And we hooked that up to your normal internet connection, and that would send it to our office, where we would receive the signal then. That's what we did.
Wow.
That was pretty cool.
Did you get involved in, like, selecting that hardware?
No, that was there already. I was just sitting at the end of an internet connection that was receiving all of those signals coming in, basically. That's what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. That's really neat. That's great.
So what happened after the apprenticeship?
Then I decided that I wanted to do something more interesting, more complicated, more stuff to learn, because I knew if I would stay there, it was great people. I liked working there, but I knew that if I would stay there, I would just spend a lot of time content management, basic web programming, and I felt like I knew a lot about this already. I want to do something else. So I actually, my last month there, I was contacted on basically the German version of LinkedIn, and got a message from the founder of a company that was just down the street from where I worked. And he said, "Hey, do you want to join us? We're searching for junior level people. We're a small startup here. We're starting to scale. Maybe you can help us." And I said, "No, I'm not really interested." I was not used to this whole getting recruited, changing jobs business because I was just 20 by then. I was like, maybe I'll just stay a while where I am right now. But then I think a few months later, I decided to write him back and say, like, yeah, maybe actually we should talk. Because then I looked up what they were doing and I thought it was pretty interesting. And I heard from other people that they had really good engineers there. So I joined that company as on a junior position. And they were just starting to grow. And I think we'll talk more about this when we talk about the history of Greylog, for example, because this is actually where it started.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing that's cool is, and I recognized this the first time that I met you, mm-hmm. but, it comes out in the story as well, but we're motivated by harder technical problems.
Yes.
And in that sense, you're, I think, a classic engineer.
I guess. I mean, this is...
You like to work on more difficult problems and always looking for that growth in your skills. Yeah, exactly. This is exactly why I took on this project at the apprenticeship to read this data from the vessels, because there was no documentation for it. I just got a random set of bytes and bits, and I had to build my own lookup table to translate their weird code, their weird ASCII code to the actual vessel names, for example. You had to get creative because you got like you at some point I figured out that this was a 6-bit ASCII encoding basically, and I knew that I could look up the ship names or the vessel names in another database, so I translated from there and just played around with 2 tables until I decoded that stuff myself basically. And that's what I always liked. That's why I left that company, because I knew how to set up this content management system and how to connect to a database and how to write applications that communicate with databases, and I felt like I wouldn't learn too much new stuff anymore. Would you try to give us a sense of what Hamburg was like? Mm-hmm. I mean, what was it? What is the city of Hamburg like? Right, we're sitting here in Houston, overlooking Buffalo Bayou at my office. What was the world like when you were 20 in Hamburg?
I think pretty much what the world is like there today, except that nowadays there's more startups.
Oh yeah,
I think. So Hamburg is one of the richest cities in Germany. I think only Munich is richer when it comes to bigger cities in Germany. And it has a strong, I don't know if that's a familiar term in the US, but a strong Hanseatic background. So that was an old trade union basically in Europe. So that was always the richest cities. That went from Spain up to Russia, and that was just connected cities that build a way to trade with each other. And so there was always business in town. There was always known to be. There is a certain spirit to Hamburg, and has always been. And Hamburg has probably 2.5 million citizens when you count the surrounding areas into it. It's the second biggest city in Germany, and it's very international. So that's what I always liked about it, because it has the harbor. It's the second biggest harbor in Europe. So you have a lot of people. Hamburg has a strong history of sailors, for example. There's a part of town called St. Pauli, and this is where the sailors, when they left their ship after being on sea for months, this is where they went to have a beer, basically. And it's still a little bit like this today. And Hamburg is known to be very, very open and very international. And back then, I think that startup that I joined after my apprenticeship was one of the few startups in Hamburg. And this was also, there weren't a lot of startups in Germany in general. And I didn't even know what I was joining back then. They are super successful today, but back then it was really no one really knew where it was going, not yet profitable. This was something unusual back then, which today seems very normal, that you get stock options and you join a company that no one knows where it's really going and has investors. That was back then was unusual in Germany. I think that changed in the last years.
You mentioned that you spent a lot of time during your apprenticeship and probably also during
Civil
service job. Yeah. Learning on your own.
Yeah.
So what were you learning on your own, and how are you learning on your own?
I was just playing around with projects that I knew I would never launch, simply because I knew they wouldn't be good enough. So I always needed a real world example to work on.
Any examples that you remember?
Random website projects, I guess.
Okay.
And I just wanted to get involved with different technologies to learn how they are different. And I never became really a master in any of those until I joined the first real company that I joined. That was after the apprenticeship. But I always knew what I needed to know to solve what I wanted to solve.
Sure.
And the moment I had that, I was just going on. So I think from basically being 13 to 21 or 22, I was just learning everything to a basic level and then start learning the next thing, simply because I wanted to get an overview of what is possible and what you can do and how you can do it. And then I started to become really good at things, because this was when I started working really professionally, and I couldn't say, hey, I'm a trainee, I'm not supposed to know all of this. This is when I started to work professionally, so of course you have to get good at certain things. And this is when I started to specialize, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing that how much people can learn on their own today from online resources.
Yeah, I think I had internet access since I was 12, I think, at least. That was in the dark internet days of Germany when I remember that our internet access was cut off at midnight. That was a special rate that you could book. That was half the price, but you could serve at night. So I always had to download documentation on Saturday night so I could work in the night. That was the state of
Saturday
internet.
Saturday nights were exciting.
Yeah, because I didn't have to get up on Sundays, so I downloaded all the information right before midnight so I could go on working, basically. Because there was no internet after that. You couldn't dial in anymore.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So the internet was always there for me when I wanted to learn something. And I grew up with resources like Wikipedia, like programming books that were just available as PDFs magically, you know? And I remember buying a few books to learn basics, but then I got bored by the examples. When it's trying to teach you object-oriented programming and it says, this is your car object, let's make it brake, and it's calling the brake method on it. And I always wanted to play around with something new and have an actual real-world project to learn how it's actually working. This is, I think, why I don't think I would have been very successful in college, for example, because I think I would be bored very fast by the not enough hands-on stuff that's actually solving problems. I'm glad it worked out.
I went to a talk a couple months ago that David Eagleman gave here in Houston, and he's a well-known neuroscientist at Baylor. Mm-hmm. He's written a couple of New York Times best-selling fiction and nonfiction books. He's got a PBS series, and somebody in the audience raised their hand and asked him what they think about screen time for children. Mm-hmm. And he said, there's research out there, and the research seems to be pretty clear for a certain age of language and during language development that kids are held back in their language development if they spend too much time on screens. Mm-hmm. But he also made the point that he said, on the other hand, in order to for these connections to be made in the brain, that you need stimulus, mm-hmm. and that what's amazing is that everybody now in their pockets has access to instant and very targeted, personalized mm-hmm. stimulus. So if you have a question about PHP as a 13-year-old, you have a world of resources at your fingertips to indulge that interest. Yeah. And that, question and answer sequence is, stimulating the brain and forming connections. Yeah. And that, it fundamentally changes the nature of learning. Yeah. And that's something that's accessible to that, today to people that, are fully connected, that wasn't available 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
Yeah, which is great, especially if you think about not that developed countries, for example, where someone cannot access an education like you could in the US or in Europe, but you're still, and you if you're lucky enough to have a computer, and even a cheap computer that can run a compiler and an IDE on it, if you somehow get internet on that thing, you'll be able to start a good career. If you have the passion and you're interested in it, now it's really at your fingertips, and I think that's great.
Now,
okay, Lennart. So you're the founder of Greylog.
Yeah, I am.
We haven't covered this yet. Tell us what Greylog is first.
Mm-hmm. Greylog is an open source project that also has a company behind it now, which is also called Greylog. And what you do with it is, if you imagine that you are a company and you have any kind of data center, or you even run in the cloud, you run on AWS, for example, then you will have devices in there that are generating information that is called log messages, L-O-G. And that information is basically a short text, like a short sentence, that is giving you information about what a device or software has just performed, or if there was an error, for example. So if you, for example, go to google.com, you will be generating tons of log messages in the Google data centers. That is, first of all, a firewall that is letting your network package in. Then there is going to be a load balancer that is routing your request to a specific server, and then that server is going to generate information that it handled your request, how long it took, from which IP address it came, all kinds of information. And now imagine that there was an error somewhere in the chain. There was a firewall that could not forward your network packet, for example, to where it should go. Or it blocked it even because it thought that you were malware that was trying to do something evil with the Google infrastructure. Now, if I called someone at Google and said, hey, I can open your website, what's going on? If you imagine that you're Google and you have hundreds of thousands of servers, finding that one log message that's telling you what was going wrong is going to take a while. And with a software like Greylog, you can centralize this information. You basically send it from the devices or the software that is generating those log messages. You send it into a central point, and this is Greylog, and this is where we accept the data. You run it in your own data center. We take the data and we make it searchable. So the person at Google can now go in and type in a search query and will find your error message and tell you, yep, that was our fault. Or, for example, will tell you, hey, you did something wrong. This is how you can fix it. And this is something that you really need. If you have more than 2 or 3 servers, then you can need this because you don't want to open 3 log files. It's basically text files. Open them in 3 different windows and try to correlate information between there. And if you have a few hundred servers, it's next to impossible to find the error message. And this is what Greylog is doing. And Greylog is open source. That means the source code is openly available. You can download it for free. And you can take the source code, improve it, and give it back to us. And we can merge this change that you did back into the main code line of Greylog.
So how did you end up starting Greylog? What was the path that led you to starting this?
So that was at this company that I mentioned, the company that I joined after my apprenticeship. Actually, on my second day there, we were searching for something that I could start working on.
What did that company do?
So they're a startup. They are basically a website builder, but a pretty good one. There's a lot of website builders out there that produce websites that are not necessarily very good looking or easy to use. They have done a very, very good job in allowing you to build very good looking and very functional websites. That's what they're doing. And when I joined, they were adding tons of new users every day, and they were adding new servers to handle all of these users. And they were also starting to accept the first paying users, so the first real customers who would call customer care and say, I tried to create this widget on my website and it failed. What went wrong? Then customer care would walk over to the developers and ask them, here's the user ID, and they got an error, figure out what the error is so we can tell the user what happened and how we can fix it or when it's going to work again. And if you add a lot of servers every day, it just took longer and longer and longer to find the error message. So on my second day, we were searching for something that I could work on. And usually you start, if you're not familiar with the infrastructure, with the team, with how everything works, then you try to find something easy to do or something that's completely isolated from what is there already. And we thought about maybe I can just start researching or figuring out what is there that we can use to centralize log files, because we thought we can't be the first in 2009 to have this problem. There's other companies with more than 2 servers in the world. There must be something. And we actually found something, but that was a commercial vendor that is still out there today and is still doing pretty fine, actually. It's very strong. That was doing exactly that, but it's not open source, not free. And that was so expensive that we immediately said, no, we're going to build this ourselves.
Not feasible to use for the problem you were trying to solve.
Yeah, we just didn't have the budget to pay this. It was so expensive.
Splunk.
Yes, exactly. And so to be more specific, I said that we're going to build this ourselves, and that couldn't be so hard. And I actually said the famous word that I would build this within 2 weeks. That was in 2009, and we're still not completely finished in 2016. Now we're the real company and 10 developers on it. But I had a prototype running within a few days. And that was just doing what we wanted to. It was accepting the logs over the network, it was writing them into a MySQL database, and I wrote a little web interface on top of it that you could search through. And that was running there for a while. And then after, I think, half a year or a year, I decided to make this my learning project to learn something new. I had never done Java before. And I thought this would be a great project to learn something new. And I didn't plan to release any of that at any time. I just, like all the other new learning projects that I did before, I just decided to, in my free time, so after work, on the weekends, to work on what I called then Greylog 2. So I just appended a 2 to it because it was completely new, which turns out to be a complete versioning nightmare because we just released version 2 of what is now called Greylog. So it's now Greylog 2.0, and the people from back then, it's a big confusion out there. You should never include a number in your product name. So yeah, I started doing that, and I showed that at a few user groups in Hamburg and at a conference in Berlin, actually. And I got so much people asking me on better documentation, better installation guides, because I just put that out there on GitHub, make it open source. And I didn't plan for others to use it. And people started to use it. And I was surprised by that. And suddenly we get 60,000 downloads a month. And people all over the world use it. And I meet people who have seen me talking about it on the internet and thank me for this product. So it started, there was definitely a need for this in the market.
Meanwhile, you were still working at that company.
Yes, exactly. And so I did all of this in my free time, basically.
Huh. That's amazing. And how quickly did you get up to 60,000 downloads per month?
I think that happened within probably a year or something. That's a great thing about open source. People suddenly see this and start talking about it because it's free and open source. And if you start talking about this and show it to colleagues, you don't feel like you're doing free marketing or sales for some company, but it's for a free and open source product out there. And this is what people like. And this is really the beauty about open source. That I had zero marketing dollars. I didn't make a lot of money back then. And I just spent some money to pay for a train ticket to go to speak at some user group. That was probably a marketing budget of €50, so I don't know, $70 or something a month. That was my marketing budget, and people all over the world were using it.
So why open source? I guess you just told me what one of the benefits, right?
Yeah.
Like frictionless distribution of
Exactly.
the product. Is that the main thing that made you release this as open source?
Yeah, and also because I was always only using open source software, so it was kind of natural for me to, well, of course it's open source. Like this, in the beginning, I didn't even think about what license to use. I just used the license that I always use, which is GPL3. And yeah, it was completely natural, which is a great thing to see that this is the standard today for developers. If they do something in their free time, it's always open source. I mean, yeah.
How soon after you built this did the company you worked at start using it?
Because they were using the prototype for a pretty long while. They were actually, the whole time I was working at that company for, I think, 2 years or something, they were using that prototype because it did exactly what we needed. They are today using the Greylog that we're developing. They switched over from the prototype to the real Greylog, I think, a few months after I left that company. Yeah.
And so it's an open source project. Mm-hmm. It's gotten a lot of traction in the market. People from all over the world downloading it, 60,000 per month. Mm-hmm. But there's still not a company.
Right. It was just me and a bunch of other open source developers. But I would say that 98% of the code was coming from me back then. Yes, it was just me.
Okay, so you had other people contributing to the code.
Yeah, exactly.
In meaningful ways, but not in small ways.
Yeah. They were spending a lot of time on it. It's free time, right? So if you spend 2 hours a week, that's already a lot of time that they were spending on it. But the most stuff really came from me. It was like small patches, small changes that came in from the outside back then.
So at what point did you think, hey, maybe I should start a company?
Mm-hmm. I actually didn't think about starting a company almost until I started a company. It was back. So after I left that startup that we talked about, I joined a company called Xing. Which is basically the German version of LinkedIn. But LinkedIn is pretty much ruling the world, the whole market, everywhere, except the German-speaking countries, because that's where Xing is. And I think today they have 15 million members or something, publicly traded company, great place to work at. And so I joined them because they were doing something. Again, I was bought with PHP, which was what we did at the other company. And I said, well, maybe I'm just going to join another company that does something else that I was doing in my free time, named Ruby, and Ruby on Rails, which is a web development framework and a programming language. And so I joined that company, and they started using Greylog pretty soon, actually, after I joined them. And I had my team lead in my team there heard me coming into lunch and coming in the morning saying, like, hey, now this big company is using Greylog, and now that big company is using Greylog. And because I was an engineer, it was cool that they were using it, but I was interested in building a great product. I wasn't that interested in who's using it. If I knew someone was using it and it makes their day easier, then my job was done. That was what I wanted. So that person then saw the interesting business background of this, saying like, look, if they are all using it and they don't use your expensive competitor, and this is the first time someone called something a competitor of Greylog. So he helped me with the business side and actually started the company together with me in Hamburg, in Germany. So then we both left Xing and started that company together.
With your team lead from that company.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And what were the first steps you took to start this company? You went out and raised money?
We thought about raising money, and we were unsure if we should do it or not in the beginning, until we were approached by... We were in the beginning. We were like, in Germany, it's not that easy to set up a company. You have to go to a notary, pay that notary a lot of money, have to do all kinds of paperwork, and it's all very regulated, and you spend a lot of time actually setting up your company. It takes a lot of time actually to get a bank account for your company, which is something I learned over here is much easier. So we were still in like the steps of setting up the company. I think we got a first customer even that was paying us to host a Greylog for a few $100s a month or something. And during that time, and I still don't really know how that happened, a German investor that is mostly government funded actually reached out to me and wrote me, hey, I heard about Greylog. That all looks really interesting. It looks like you started a company. Are you interested in venture capital? And back then, I didn't really know what that is. Or I knew what it is, but I didn't know how it works, right? And so yeah, we met that person, and that person actually ended up one of our first investors. And One a wonderful investor, great to have that company on board with us, and we saw what I understand now, which is the moment you have one investor on board, it's much easier to get others on board too. So we then basically switched over from getting the company established to raising money. So we kind of stumbled into that process, and we actually ended up with 4 venture capital investors funding that company at the end of 2013, probably a year after we established the company legally. We got venture funding in.
Yeah,
all in Germany. It was all a German company.
All German, right?
Actually, all of them German investors too.
Did you find that it was taking a lot of time out of working on the actual product, though? Was that frustrating at all, or did you think that was the most important thing to be doing at that time?
I think we all agreed it was the most important time to do. It was also forcing us to do some exercises, like get a proper business plan in place, get a lot of proper paperwork in place, build a real strategy, figure out who we want to hire, because this is stuff that venture capital is going to accelerate, that we would have probably... I don't know what would have happened if we didn't take on that venture capital.
And it was just 2 of you up until when you raised that money?
Yes, pretty much. Okay. Pretty much. We then had...
just real quick, sorry. I mean, it's a lot. This question comes up a lot in Houston. Mm-hmm. How do I raise money? Where do I raise money from? And your first investor actually came to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
you
didn't seek that person out. They came to you. And they came to you because you had built it and you had tons of traction.
Yes. We try to figure out how that all came together. We both, like that investor and I and everyone involved, can't really figure out how that actually came together. But I remember taking that phone call and trying to have a conversation that I back then didn't really understand what I was doing, but it seems like I was convincing enough to get into like a real conversation with that fund.
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to generalize, but what happened was your product brought you that investor, right? You built it, and either that investor or a friend of that investor downloaded the software and tried it out and got excited about it, and that's your product basically.
Or probably even portfolio companies of that investor, because that's something we see a lot too. There was actually we were joking, if you turned on a German news channel that was selling ads a little cheaper than others, where all these startups were advertising, you could watch the news for 5 minutes, and probably half of the advertisements were from companies that we knew were using Greylog, because we were of course very, very popular among startups that have small budgets, cannot pay for this expensive competitor. We're of course going to go with Greylog. So, yeah.
How much of what you wrote in the business plan you presented to venture capitalists, now 3 years later, 4 years later, has actually played out to be true and accurate?
That's a hard question. I think the general theme of it has turned out to be accurate. The details on it, some of them changed over the time, of course. I mean, you learn from the market, you learn about your own company, and you learn about what you're able to do. And on some things, we got much more done than we thought, and on other sides, we got less done than we thought. But overall, the plan of taking that money to get Greylog out there, build a stable product, build something that huge corporations could use to replace that commercial competitor is something that, especially in the last 6 months, has proven to be true, because that is what's happening all over the world right now. And just because in the beginning we were known in Central Europe, in Germany and France, where I was going around with my small train ticket budget showing this, right? And I remember being in New York City in 2014, I think, and I was at a conference and was standing in line for the after party, and there were 2 guys behind me who were mumbling something about Greylog, and is that the guy? Is that the guy? And so then they came up to me and were like, "Are you the Greylog guy?" I was like, "Yeah, I guess that's me." And they said, "Yeah, we're from Kathmandu, and we're using it every day." So we somehow managed to get this software out, like everywhere in the world, basically, and that was the first goal that we wanted to accomplish. So I think that worked.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to point that out that it's amazing that your first investor came to you, right? But I mean, it's because you had in your spare time gone and built this thing.
Yes.
and you had gotten traction.
Yeah.
I hear the question about raising money. I hear the question about how do I find a technical co-founder, for example, a lot. And a lot of times I'll tell people that you've got to go out and do what you can to get traction, right? To prove out your concept.
Yeah, which is, I think both sides benefit from it, because maybe I would have figured out in the time that I was working on Greylog in my free time that this is actually not what I want to do, and I think by doing something for some time in your free time and getting a lot of feedback, that also validates the idea for you. So you don't start a business that is probably just not going to work, or something you will not enjoy. So this is where open source is great, because you suddenly hear from big companies using it who validate it for you. So you will also be able to raise money on a much better valuation, simply because you have something already. Like you start a seed round with something that that can have a product market fit already. I think this is where open source is great.
Tell us about team building. So how much money did you guys raise?
We raised about 1 million euros in the seed round. That was the first round. So I think back then it was $1.3 million or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So you raised a good bit of money,
yeah.
and then the next thing you did was set your sights on building a team.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
exactly.
So tell us how did you build the team?
We had the huge benefit of, again, being an open source product, that we had a community already of people who were working on it, who were working with me on it before. And I knew great engineers in town that I was working with in teams before. So we basically just hired our complete open source community of the core contributors, really, who are still working with us today.
Is that right?
Yeah. So I was on a call, I think, with them this morning. That's the people that I was working on Greylog in 2010. When they were doing it in their free time, or at the companies they were working at. We, of course, hired them first thing. Something to be careful about there is, and I think that's what happened to some open source projects, is if you hire your complete community, your community is gone. So you also have to be careful with how fast you hire your community, because suddenly it's just a company that also happens to have an open source project, and the whole community works for that company. But back then, because Greylog is not the typical web development open source project where everybody can quickly go in, change a little bit of code, and make a meaningful change. Greylog is pretty complicated. Just the nature of what it's doing is something that you have to get your head around, that you have to learn how it's working internally. It's high performance processing of messages throwing through a core, where all kinds of optimizations are in, and it's nothing where you just stop by and make a small change. So our community wasn't that huge of core contributors. That was people who invested time in learning how this stuff works. So we hired a good chunk of our community, and
So did you make the mistake of hiring too much from your community, or no?
No, I don't think we did that.
Okay.
Because we spread that out over half a year roughly, and
okay.
Yeah, I've seen that happening to other open source projects. So you're just got to be careful with what you're doing there. But yeah, so we hired a combination of our community and people we knew out of town, and had a pretty complete engineering team within, I would say, half a year, roughly.
So your product brought you your first investor. It garnered customers automatically by way of just open source distribution, and it also filled your hiring pipeline. And you built a team of how many people?
We built
over 6 months.
7 in total. Yeah. 7 in total, of which 3 were coming out of the community, and we had more in the pipeline that we hired later. Yeah.
There's another example I heard recently of a company hiring from their community, commercial company, Macrofab. So Chris was telling me that I think it was I can't remember what the role was, but he had somebody who used the service, and they came in and took a tour and chatted with people, and they liked the guy so much that after he took the tour as a customer, they were like, "Do you want to work here?"
Right. Yeah.
And they and I think he was just as excited about it as they were, and it was a great fit.
Yeah, it's great. Open source gives you a lot of benefits, all like all through the journey of your project and your company.
Well,
sure.
I think not just. I mean, I think I get it that that's true for open source, especially because you can grow your user base. Maybe there's less friction and grow it more quickly. But Macrofab's not open source, and our director of engineering was a member of our community and one of our beta testers. He's been at the company for more than 10 years now. And and he heard about us because he was a user of the product. And then we ended up liking some of the side work that he was doing on the company. We flew him down here from Wisconsin, and now he runs our engineering team.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, this way of hiring also, imagine having a ramp-up time for a new employee of half a day, roughly, which is that employee setting up his or her new MacBook, basically, and then just go on with what you did before and get paid for it and do it full time.
That's great. And so how big is the engineering team now? You were 6 months after raising the money, and you're a little bit bigger than that now?
We're still less than 15, actually. The whole company is still less than 15, but we're extremely focused on the engineering side still. So we're
Sure.
I'm proud to say that we're still a mostly engineering company. Like most of the team is actually engineering. Yeah.
So, what milestone did you get to before you raised more money at the company?
We were close to releasing our 1.0 release, which is the first stable in two ways release of the software. It's stable in the meaning of it's not crashing all the time, and you can actually run a lot of load against it, and it won't just randomly crash if you do that, or just randomly crash. That's a 1.0, and then also the APIs are stable. That means that you can start building stuff on top of it, and we guarantee by saying this is the 1.0 of it, we will not change that in a while. And then we released a 2.0, and that might have new APIs, but that's probably a year out, which is exactly what happened. We just released our 2.0.
Just now, yeah.
And I think the other milestone that we had was that we got our first real customer that was dedicating a lot of time and resources internally at the company to run Greylog and to run it on a large scale and actually pay us a substantial amount of money for Greylog. And that was, I think that was the milestone from a business perspective, that we had really built something that was accepted out there and that people build stuff on top.
Yeah. So how do people make money with open source software? You just got finished telling us that it's completely free. So how do you make money as a business?
Right. That's the flip side of all the benefits of open source, of course, is figuring out how do you make money off that and how you pay your developers and your people working on that, right? Is the classic way, I think, right now is support and services. That means that you're selling software contracts, you're selling hourly based consulting to companies that are using your product simply to get them run more stable, to give them an insurance that if something goes wrong, they have a phone number to call, or to help them with setup, with upgrades, stuff like that. That is something you can do. I think the first suggested way because open source software is 35, 40 years old now. That's not a new concept. That has been done forever. The first recommended way of monetizing open source software was actually printing handbooks and selling that. Basically printing out the documentation, bring it in the good book format, and send it out in mail to people and sell that. And this is the way you monetize your open source project. That was, of course, before internet, where no one prints out anything anymore, right? You just get the documentation with it always, and you don't have to pay for it. So support and services is, I think, the most common way to do it right now. There is a trend that is called open core. That means that your core functionality of the product is open source, but stuff on top of it is being sold. That means that you have special functionality that, for example, a big company would need if they run your open source software. Then they should pay some money for it, which is, for example, if you have to be compliant to anything, then there might be an audit log module that is being sold, and then that company would buy that, maybe together with support and services.
But that's not something you guys are doing. You're focused on service and support.
We focus on services and support, but we just started selling actually commercial modules on top of Greylog. Right. So we just started doing that with the 2.0 release. And that, exactly what I just mentioned, is how we plan to do it, is stuff on top of Greylog that helps a bigger company be successful with Greylog. And we say that the APIs that our commercial functionality is built on top of are still open, so that if you want to build the stuff yourself, you can still do that. They're documented and open. But if you want to get something that is supported by us, that's guaranteed to be working and ready right now, then you can also just buy it. And larger corporations tend to do that because why would they train developers and spend money and time of developers on extending your software when that is available already at a reasonable price? So that's what we just started doing together with the supported services. Mm-hmm.
So, Lennart, this was all in Hamburg, and we're here having this conversation in Houston. And so, at some point, you moved to Houston. What's up with that?
So we decided to move the company to Houston, and of course, that meant that I would be moving with the company to Houston. So,
why though? Why did you guys move to Houston?
So we moved the company to Houston simply because, well, we moved it to the U.S. first of all, simply because our biggest market is here. Our possible partners are here. We're just much closer to the people that we need to work with and that we want to work with. And we moved to Houston simply because two of our investors were based in Houston. So our friends at Mercury Fund, who led our Series A round, are based in Houston, and also one of our seed investors is also based in Houston. So because we're not hiring engineering talent for now in the US, we had no reason to go to Silicon Valley, for example. And we said we're going to go to Houston where we can hire great talent for everything that we need, but just don't pay the crazy prices that we will pay over in Silicon Valley. I mean, I'm renting a complete house now in Houston for the same price of. It has a huge garden, and I'm paying the same price that I'm paying for my small apartment in Hamburg. So the cost of living is just so much lower in Houston.
Right. So what are the business culture differences between Germany and the U.S.? You've been here now for how long?
I've spent a lot of time here last year already. I'm here for a year or something in total now, and the business differences are really not that big between Germany and the U.S. It's just two very rich, very developed countries that have a very similar business culture, I think. There are some things that you have to get used to. It's how fast you hire people, and also if someone decides to leave the company, how fast these people leave the company. Because in Germany, you stay for at least 3 months. And you can't leave the company without working for 3 more months. And the company also can't fire you without keeping you for 3 more months. So there are some things that are just unusual that you have to get used to. They're just a little different, but the general culture, I would say, isn't very different. Really.
Yeah, so some of that varies in the United States from state to state as well.
Okay.
Right? I mean, Texas is a at-will state for in terms of
employment,
yeah, in terms of employment. So you like Houston?
I love Houston. I had to get used to it. I always like to tell the story of when I flew to Houston the first time was actually the first time I flew to the US. That was in 2014, and I've never been to the US before. I actually never left the European Union before I flew to the US that day. Huh. And I had to get my passport to fly over there because in the European Union, you don't even need an ID. You just get out of a plane like you get out of a train. And you're just, wow, now you're in France, now you're in Italy, now you're in Spain. So I had to get a passport and apply for one a few days before I flew to the US. And I had a connection flight to Amsterdam, and that was delayed. So I asked the flight attendant if I would make my flight to the US. And he looked at his list of delayed flights that he got in the meantime and looked at me and said, yeah, you'll be fine. Yeah, you'll be fine. And the guy sitting next to me looked at him, looked at me again, looked at him again, and said, yeah, he'll be fine, except he's going to Houston. So that was on the way to Houston. That was really my first, that was before I flew to the US the first time. So I had to get used to it. Houston doesn't have the best image, I would say, in the US.
Is that right? Huh.
I think when I meet people...
In Germany, you mean? Or in Europe?
In Germany, because it's Texas, I think. Okay. Texas is a little special. Like Bavaria is seen a little special, I would say.
Okay. What did you expect coming in?
I really didn't expect anything because I knew that Germans have a very stereotypical view on Americans. So I was like, I'm just going to see it. I'm here for 5 days. What can possibly go wrong, right? So I just flew over. The first thing you see is the huge billboards on the way from the airport. You're like, wow, maybe that's not actually stereotypical. It is just like that. But then the moment you spend a little more time here, the people are nice. The food is great. That's really the two things that I need to feel great in another place. It's great people. I love Houston.
I noticed on Facebook the other day that you take public transport now to your office.
I do,
which is like totally not a Houston thing. You're like,
that's true. That's because I'm lucky. We're living very close to the light rail, to the red line here in Houston. So I just walk to the next crossing at the next block, basically, get into a train, and then get out in Midtown and just walk to our office from there. So I'm just lucky enough to be able to take the public transportation. We had an office location somewhere else before, and I just couldn't. I always wanted to. I enjoy the morning, just read something, maybe start with your emails, get into office with a clear head. And I have a 10-minute walk from the train station with a Starbucks in the middle. And that's something when you're coming from Europe where you take public transportation anywhere and you can actually walk. In cities where you can walk. That's probably the biggest difference. And also, I think one of the biggest parts where Houston has to improve. Simply because I tried to walk once, and I'll never do it again because I almost got hit like 3 times in a 10-minute period.
Sure.
So it just is not a good idea. I think that's
I joke with people that you only walk in Houston if you want to get hit by a car.
Yeah, exactly.
But I wish Houston was more of a walking city, and in my own places, I try to walk as much as possible.
Yeah.
So I live in West U, and I walk to the Rice Village at least 2 or 3 times a week. Mm-hmm. And where I am, Sawyer and Washington, our office, Catalina Coffee's a short walk away. I mean, and even if it's hot, like I don't mind sweating.
Exactly. I mean, we were office neighbors before, right, at our old office. Yeah. So I know the walk to Catalina Coffee, and then Buffalo Bayou Park is beautiful.
Amazing, right?
It's amazing park, over there. Yeah. You can walk there. So I got my daily walking in there for like 30 minutes by just walking around the park.
So have you put on weight in moving to the States?
I have put on a lot of weight moving to the States. That goes back to the great food, the Texas-sized portions, and the lack of walking and any physical activity that you're not planning. In Hamburg, I was walking from where I live in Altona to the city center where our Greylog office in Hamburg is. That's a 45-minute walk that I do every morning and then back at night. So I'm walking 1.5 hours just without planning by default every day. That's probably, I had days in Houston where my little iPhone step counter was like less than 1,000. I mean, that's what I have. If I take the train to the office in the morning, I have like 1,500 already in Hamburg, right? Sure. So, that's the difference.
Yeah, you're like living the Houston public transport dream.
I am.
I have friends that are public transport wonks, and they'd be like, "Oh wow, we need to like bottle this guy up and figure out how to reproduce it."
Yeah, I'm enforcing the European way here by just enforcing taking public transportation.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we can. Okay, so favorite restaurants.
That's a good question.
I realized that we need to make that a fixture in all of our interviews.
Absolutely.
It's Houston, after all. Right?
Yeah. We have to talk about food at some point.
My favorite restaurants are probably Beavers is great. We've been there together.
Yeah.
That was a walking distance from the old office. They're closed on Mondays, very important. I stood at closed doors a lot. Beavers is great. That's close to Washington Avenue. I love B&B Butchers, also close directly on Washington Avenue, actually. Torchy's Tacos, of course. I'm a big fan of soul food, which probably goes back to the did you gain weight while spending time in Houston. That's great places. I mean, I'm a big fan of fusion food. So there is, what's it called? It's a Korean-American fusion food close to the medical center. I forgot the name. That's a great place. Steakhouses.
I always tell people with fusion food that the risk is that when they fuse together A and B, that it's neither good A nor good B.
Something totally different.
They're good at it. They are good at it, though.
But there are good fusion places.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. What about bars? Do you have any local... Didn't you tell me once that you were into sand volleyball?
I am not, but my girlfriend actually came to Houston to play volleyball for Rice. She was basically imported from Poland to play volleyball for Rice.
Wow.
She was scouted in Poland to come over here to play volleyball. And so there's volleyball bars in Houston, which I didn't know. It's like a volleyball court.
Yeah,
it's
right?
a volleyball court with a bar around it. And I'm terribly bad at volleyball. I'm just not very good at it. And they are really good. That's the best in town, the people that play there. So I just stand around and drink beer, which I can do. That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
When it comes to bars, there's one place that I recommend to people that we discovered recently. It's called Moon Tower Inn, and it's in East Downtown. And it's a bar that I like because it's a little more what I'm used to, what bars should be like, I think, because that's actually a cultural difference. Is in America, you can't just go somewhere and have a beer and just drink your beer. There's always a turtle race, or there's a there's 50 TV monitors with all kinds of sports around you, or trivia, or people. It seems like people need to do something while having a beer. In that place, there's nothing. There's just picnic tables and a really good beer selection. You just go there, have your beer, and go home. That's a great place. That's a bar I like. And then, of course, the Midtown places around our new office.
By the way, you're at Station, right?
I'm at Station.
So tell us about that, because I'm a big fan of what Station is doing.
I'm a big fan now, too.
What is it, first?
So Station is a co-working space. I'm used to co-working spaces from Europe. Hamburg, Berlin, they got a lot of co-working spaces. And it basically means that you can rent a table, you get a fridge full of drinks, you get events over there, you got free coffee, and you got a place where you can put up your MacBook and your monitor, and you got a little locker, and that's your desk. So you're basically renting a desk for a pretty reasonable price.
What do you pay?
I think we're paying like $400 or something for everything. Right. So that's perfect. And it's great people over there. And I love that they're trying to, what I think is something else that Houston is missing actually, is the collaboration of startup people, of engineers, because everyone seems to be so much in their little oil and gas company bubble. Like, this is simply because it's so isolated. There's the people at Exxon, the people at Shell, the people at BP, and there's no collaboration going on. Mm-hmm. And this co-working initiative tries to bring all of this together and tries to foster a startup ecosystem. And so I'm saying that.
I mean, those industries aren't ones that develop in a collaborative way or develop in the open. Yeah. On the other hand, if you look at the world of technology, there is a long-standing tradition of developing in the open. Yeah. Right? I mean, sure, companies have lots of proprietary secrets, but then they have their public-facing APIs, and they try to get people to use their public-facing APIs. And so there's an element of connectivity between these companies in the tech world that is just doesn't have a analog in the energy industry.
Exactly, and you get access to mentors. Like, I think both of you are actually mentors over there, so if I want to talk to people who are experienced in a certain area, I can just meet them there. The people who run Station Houston are extremely helpful. Yesterday, I met someone who does UX and is just starting his own little UX company, so user experience, and we need some help with user experience. So next week he's going to come in and just looks at our web interface and is going to try to help and see how he can help with this. There's a copywriter sitting at the next table if I need help with a blog post. So it's a great way and a great place to collaborate.
Yeah, the thing that I've loved the most about it so far is that whenever I go there, I meet new people. New people that are like really talented. They're ambitious. They're smart. People that I want to like meet again.
Yes.
I mean, I run it. I've met several over there. And otherwise, those hits, in terms of running into people like that, just organically, is much lower.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So that's great.
So let's talk a little bit more about Greylog. Where are you at right now? What kind of traction are you guys getting now that you've moved to the U.S. and you've released an actual commercial product? How's that going?
That's going pretty well, actually. Like I said, we just released our version 2.0 of Greylog. We saw a huge bump in proliferation and adoption of Greylog with our 1.0 that we released a year ago. That brought a lot of stability. The 2.0 that came out now is bringing the features that the users of the 1.0 were asking for the most. So it's a feature release full of new features, and our internal metrics are already showing that the rate of people who are installing it and keeping it is going up dramatically.
Very good, very good. So you have your engineers over in Germany,
mm-hmm.
and you have your business team over here.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like working with a distributed team? Obviously, there's a huge time zone difference. So how do you manage that?
So could let me ask that question with a twist. So 2.0 just shipped. When exactly?
I think on April 27th or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to know the exact date because that's exciting, right?
It is. It was. We worked on that for a year. That was a big release.
Yeah.
It was very important.
So what was that? What was it like with you? Were you here when that happened?
I was here.
So you weren't because I know you go back to Germany some.
Yeah.
But what was that like? Sort of pushing that out the door with your being here and everyone else being over there. Because I know that big new releases are exciting time.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and there's I know that leading up to them, you pull late nights and there's a push to get it all done.
Yes.
Usually.
Yeah, that push was there, and I could feel it over the Atlantic Ocean. Like the team was working like crazy on this. That was great. So it's different. It was the first big release. I mean, we had 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 in between, but the 1.0, for example, the whole American team was over in Germany on that day. Like we spent the whole week over there. So the 2.0 was really the first big release, with especially me being separated from the rest of the engineering team. And that is different. It's because it's usually a real celebration to press the enter button. That's starting the scripts, that's pushing it out there. And we have one last click that is marking the new version as the currently active version on the internet. And then we have 15,000 Greylog installations all over the world. And all of these installations within 30 minutes get a little red bubble and a notification saying there's a new release out there. So that's always a big moment. And that happened now with 5,500 miles between us. And it was not a problem. It was just different. And we've been working distributed like this for over a year already. And we're also distributed within Germany. So we have engineers in Hamburg that are in our main office over there.
Okay.
But then we also got engineers around Cologne, in Berlin, and in Munich. So that team, again, is distributed, at least in the same time zone, but they are distributed too. So we're kind of used to this already. It still feels different because that's a big moment. And I knew I could hear them opening the beers, basically, over the Atlantic. And I couldn't yet because it was 10 in the morning. And I had to wait a few hours to actually open a beer.
That's awesome. And what do you guys use to close the gap tools-wise? I know there's one that I want you to talk about, High Five, because I took that idea from you, and we use it at my company a ton. But what are some of the things that you guys use to bridge, the 5,500 miles?
Yeah, we use Slack a lot. We almost the promise of Slack to get rid of emails actually worked, and I don't know if it's better or not, but we did definitely get rid of emails for our engineering team. We have a dev@Greylog email address, and there's almost nothing going over that anymore. That's all happening in the chat rooms. If you use the @here and @channel notifications wisely, then no one's missing anything. We're using a great tool called Discourse. That's something we're using internally where if I, for example, had a conversation with a customer or with a prospect or a sales call or something like this, then I just copy in my notes from that call into Discourse, which is like an internal discussion forum, pretty much. But you can host it yourself. It has upvotes and likes and all kinds of modules with it. And we use that to synchronize on topics that are not necessarily interesting for everyone, that don't really fit into Slack. That's a great tool because you can decide if you want to read it or not, because not everyone's going to be interested in me talking to a certain customer, for example. We use what works very well for us is that we have a weekly all-hands meeting where we just all get together. And sometimes it's great to see when no one is actually in the Hamburg office and no one is in the Houston office, but we're all distributed and we're filling up the bottom part of the Google Hangouts that we're using like people sitting at home working on Greylog. That's pretty cool. You got like the whole hangout full of people working remotely. That's working great. We got weekly reports. We just write what you accomplished and where you need help what you're going to do next week, and that way you learn how to work distributed. It's just I think you have to decide to be distributed. It doesn't work to have like one person somewhere else because that person's going to be left out. So you have to enforce, even if you in the Hamburg office talk about something, and we're still working on that and still getting better with that. But you have to, even if you have a conversation over a coffee in the Hamburg office, it's important to take those notes and write them into discourse, so that everyone else can participate too.
So you do product management in Discourse, or is it more customer, deal management, or
it's really information sharing. It's
on any subject,
on anything.
A customer, it could be the product roadmap, it could be
everything that it is you post something that has a headline and a body, and that's it. And then it has comments, so you can really throw in whatever you want. It's a great tool. I like it a lot.
Huh. Interesting.
And it's open source.
Yeah, maybe if Slack added threading, maybe Slack, these kind of things could happen within Slack, which by the way, I've heard is coming in Slack.
Okay, that'd be interesting.
Conversation threading.
Yeah,
I've been surprised at how Slack has taken over communication at my company. Like we were kind of late adopters. I feel like a lot of people were on Slack a year ago or 18 months ago, but it wasn't until about 3 or 4 months ago at Snapstream that just kind of a switch flipped, and suddenly, everybody had it, and everybody had it on their phones, and
yes. I'm a proud beta subscriber of Slack. When they just started, I think I have a really low the Greylog channel on Slack has a really low user ID. You can see that. So we started really early with it. Yeah.
Nice. That's great. So, how do you spend your time now, personally? You were the original engineer on the product.
Yeah.
Where are you spending your time now? Is it? Do you spend any time engineering and writing software? And how much time are you spending talking to customers? What exactly is your role personally now?
Yeah. It's hard to define. I think it's I don't work on the core of Greylog anymore. It's simply because it's. I should probably cut that, right?
Probably.
I'll just ask that again. So,
there you go.
So how do you spend your time personally at the company now? You were the original engineer on the product, and are you still doing engineering, or your title is CEO?
Mm-hmm.
So what is your what's your responsibility now with this team?
I was still working on the actual Greylog core when I started the company, especially in the first days. Both Kai and I, our first engineer who started the company, who joined us on the first day, basically, we were both just working full time on Greylog on the code because it was just us and we had so many things to do. I then gradually stopped, more and more, stopped working on the Greylog core actually, simply because my days are now so hard to plan that I cannot be part of any roadmap development or the development of Greylog that's part of any roadmap, because suddenly something comes up and then I won't be delivered or won't be able to deliver the code within the time frame. Then I keep everybody I'm just going to block processes. So we all decided that I'm not working on the Greylog core anymore. I love coding though, and it's almost like recreational work on code from time to time. So sometimes I would change something on the website of Greylog.org or work on the payment system of Greylog.org, or something that's not necessarily part of the actual product.
Sure.
So that's the engineering I'm doing. And then besides that, I just talk a lot to customers. I'm, of course, involved with our investors a lot. It's really coordination of everyone. I think it's the classic stuff that a CEO and founder of a young company is doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are things that you haven't had a lot. Have you had much experience doing those things, right? So how have you taught yourself to do these non-technical things?
Yeah.
You talked earlier about how you taught yourself to program and had great mentors that guided you through that.
Yeah, it's
how have you done that for the non-technical stuff?
I think the same way, and I'm still doing that every day. I have a good network of people that can help me with my questions. Something like when I started programming, I needed people to tell me how to do things properly. Or when you knew you could do something a certain way, but you didn't know if that was a good way or not, then, especially at Station and at the people in Houston that I know by now, I can just reach out to them and figure out how to do it. Our investors are very helpful with that. So I think it's pretty much the same approach. When we started thinking about seed funding for this company, I didn't know what a convertible was, for example. I didn't know what a cap table was. I had no idea how to work with lawyers now or attorneys. That's all stuff you just learn by maybe doing it wrong once. But if you have good people around you, they'll tell you that you did it wrong and how to do it right. And then you will just learn it. So it's really people around you that help you do it.
And any particularly good online resources that you've leaned on or books that you've read that...
I had a big confession is that I had board meetings which I, under the table, would quickly look up a term that I didn't know on Investopedia, which is a great resource for emergency term lookups. No, nothing particularly online, I think. Just a Google search and then still have someone around you to validate what you think you should be doing. People who have experience, that's really all you need.
So what's next? What do you see ahead for Greylog in the next 12 months?
Mm-hmm.
2.0 just came out. Sorry, you were saying, but 2.0 just came out. You have this. What did you call it? Open core.
Exactly, it's
right?
open core.
Right, so you have something you're selling now. So you have some new revenue streams, perhaps, besides support.
Yeah, we have sales that are going really well, and I'm looking forward to keep that going and see that increasing like it did during this year already. And we're working on features. We have some shortcomings in the product that we are very, very clear about. That we have a roadmap for how to fix them. So a very clear engineering roadmap for the rest of the year. We start working on our 3.0 series basically already. That's going to be something I can't really tell yet what's going to be in there, but it's going to be something I think very exciting from an engineering perspective. But there's actual really good engineering going on right now in Germany. I'm always excited when I go over there and see the results of what the team over there did. We keep on developing the product, and we are also in the process right now of signing up some very interesting partners and customers. So I'm looking forward to maybe some press releases coming out in the summer about that.
Cool.
Yeah.
And fundraising? What are your future fundraising plans?
We will be probably not fundraising this year anymore. But one thing I learned is that you're basically always fundraising. While we're always fundraising, I think that the next actual fundraising we're looking into probably next year. That's at least, if you look at the cash on the account, then there's not, like the next fundraising is probably planned for next year. Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Well, hey, Lennart, thanks a lot for joining us. This has been really informative. You've accomplished a lot in a short amount of time, and I think it's really awesome how you've learned what you've needed to know along the way, whether it's programming skills or raising money or navigating, building a customer base.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. So it's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.